All right, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. So, in the US and around the world, in countries around the world, there's a social safety net, which John talked about a bit. Government programs that are there for you if you're down on your luck or otherwise have low income. And we're in the midst of a transformation in the way that some people think about how the social safety net had been structured. So let me walk you through how it's historically been thought about and what some of the new ideas are. So historically, we were up here in the top two kind of buckets up here, transferring to people if you don't work or you can't work, or transferring to people if you do or if you do work. And more recently, people have been thinking down here, and we'll get there in a second. So let's start in the upper left corner, transferring to people if you don't work or you can't work. This is the way that historically most transfers in the United States have happened. They're means-tested transfers. So for example, if you're disabled, you can get disability insurance. If you're unemployed, you can get unemployment insurance. We had a traditional cash welfare system that went to people with low income. Relative to that, over the last 30 or 40 years, the cash transfer system has had a major evolution. Cash welfare has been cut back, and the earned income tax credit has been expanded tremendously over the last 30 or 40 years. It's now almost 4 times as large in expenditures as traditional cash welfare. And what the earned income tax credit does is it transfers to you if you do work, but doesn't give you a transfer if you don't work. And those transfers can be very large, so up to $6,500 at the federal level and almost $3,000 in California that you can get. And that's a very, very big deal if you're earning $15,000 to $20,000. So we've seen a big transformation. And while I was the acting chief economist at Treasury, as Gordon mentioned, we expanded the earned income tax credit relative to current law. So people were very excited about this. So what's happened more recently? What's happened more recently is that people have noticed that employment rates have been declining. Employment rates are now about 4 percentage points lower than they were 2 decades ago. So they peaked in 2000. They've been coming down broadly ever since, and with some ups and downs, but broadly coming down. That's due to a number of factors that people have pointed to. Automation, rising import competition, population aging. And people are worried that over the long run they may actually fall further, and in that case people might not be able to find work. And so in that case maybe an earned income tax credit makes less sense because you can give people an incentive to work, but if they can't find the jobs, then that's not going to work. And so that's led to these new sort of ideas down here, a universal basic income, which would go to you no matter what. A presidential candidate has proposed this. Some people think, maybe every American should get $10,000, or maybe this presidential candidate says every American should get $1,000, or a guaranteed job. There are a number of ideas that presidential candidates have of guaranteed jobs, for example, under a Green New Deal. So big changes in how people think about it. So on the left, you see here transfers that go to you even if you don't work. On the right, you see here transfers that go to you if you do work. Okay, so there are major trade-offs that we face when we think about how to structure the social safety net and which of these options we should choose. Economists sometimes think about the so-called iron triangle of the safety net. So, that the idea behind the iron triangle is that you can't simultaneously achieve all 3 of these goals: redistribution, cost, and encouraging work. So for example, under traditional cash welfare, it redistributes a lot to people who have no or very little income, but it doesn't encourage work. In fact, it might discourage people from getting work if they can only get the transfer if they're not working. The earned income tax credit encourages work because it gives you up to a very large transfer if you work, but it doesn't redistribute as much to people who can't find work or who are otherwise have low income. On the other hand, there are some programs that are very expensive. So for example, the universal basic income could be very expensive. If we gave every American a $1,000 check, which isn't nearly enough to cover most people's expenses, that by itself would be as expensive, roughly, as all poverty programs in the United States, excluding Medicaid. Just that $1,000 check for every American over 18. So that would be very expensive. It wouldn't redistribute as much as traditional cash welfare, and in fact, it might even discourage work, as illustrated in this cartoon. If you're getting a transfer, no matter what, then what's the incentive to work? So I've been stuck, I and a lot of other people have been stuck in this iron triangle for a long time, trying to figure out how to escape. And I've kind of just been beating my head against this issue for a really long time. But my research potentially suggests a way out of the iron triangle. So I've done a lot of work studying existing programs and what they do. And a key way out of the iron triangle is to make investments that pay off. And if those investments pay off enough, then you can redistribute. But if it's also an investment, not just a redistribution, then it has a cost, but there's a return on that investment. If those returns are big enough, then it eases that trade-off between redistribution and cost. And if those investments are big enough, sometimes they pay off in future workforce participation, and so we can ease the trade-off between redistributing and encouraging work as well. So for example, some of my research on Head Start, how Head Start can make a difference, shows that Head Start, which is a free pre-K program for children in low-income families, leads parents to be more involved with their kids and leads to better long-run outcomes. A second paper of mine looks at guaranteed jobs for low-income youth and shows that it can lead them to less crime and actually, in some cases, can actually save their life, including particularly by a reduction in deaths from homicide. And some of my most recent work shows that disability insurance can actually save people's lives who are very sick. So this shows that these programs that people had traditionally thought of as redistributive programs actually can be investments that pay off. And so even though it looks like they do have a cost, and in fact they do, they can pay off more than that cost is. And so it eases that redistributive tension. The more I've been involved in policy, the more I've realized that what policymakers need is not just an understanding of what the programs do, but also predictions about what's going to happen to the economy in the future. And that's where some of my most recent work is starting to head, and where my work will probably head in the future to some extent. So I'm currently on the technical panel of the Social Security Administration. Social Security is the biggest social insurance program in the United States. $1 trillion were spent last year on the Social Security program. And we're working with the Social Security Advisory Board to try to improve Social Security's models of its finances so that we can better understand the timing and magnitude of changes that need to get made to Social Security before the trust fund runs out of money. I'm working on the future of work, trying to use the latest statistical techniques to project into the future what are jobs going to look like into the future. How much is going to be manufacturing? How much is going to be services? What are employment rates going to look like? Which is crucial also to designing the social safety net of the future. And I'm starting to work on what is the impact of climate change in on the economy, and what will that look like in the future. So all of this is part of something I'm co-founding called Futureproof, which I'm very excited about, which is going to try to predict the future impacts of policy and other events on the economy, and therefore help to inform policymakers and others about the best policy now. So I just got to UCSD in July. I'm delighted to be here. I'm very grateful for the support that UCSD has given me. Thank you very much for the opportunity.